Good morning. Time for another desert reflection, a time to reflect on the week and share some thoughts that I've had this week and in general that I want to share with you as we're all trying to get to this a little bit more challenging time that a lot more challenging time that we're all going through and together. I Let me start off with group. What we had a great discussion in group. It was challenging, but it was fantastic. We started off making ocarinas, which are a clay flute, and part of that was just it was fun, a fun thing to make, and my group loves making things and being creative, and they really wanted to do it, and so I taught them how to make ocarinas, and as we're making these ocarinas, I'm able to watch the dynamics of the process within the group, and if the details are all that important, just the basic pattern, right? Where somebody will say something, somebody else might be a little bit critical of that thing somebody said, and then somebody else will chime in about what they did, and somebody else will mumble under their breath, and somebody else will make a side comment, and somebody else will, and then this process fuels and feeds on itself, and sometimes it just dies naturally, and other times it escalates and becomes more of an argument or an issue. And everybody struggles to see their part, classic family dynamic and emotional process. And so after we got done making the ocarinas and finished that, we spent some time breaking down what happens. And some people are able to see it right away. Other people really struggle to understand what's happening. Other people feel like, the classic making a mountain out of a molehill. You have varieties of reactions, and I think it's true to life that as all of us are trying to examine our patterns and relationships, I would say even more now than ever, because we're having to be around each other more, we're under more stress, anxiety, and it's bringing out things that maybe we weren't able to pay attention to before, maybe we were blinded to before, maybe we didn't want to see them, maybe they're just so a part of what we do that we don't even know how to think about it. And it leads me to the second thought that I've had this week, is that too often when we are trying to change something, we think of things as massive problems, and the characterological flaws that we can't change them. We're lazy, we're inconsiderate, we don't like change. Some of the classic things we say, self-sabotaging, and those things aren't false. I just don't think they're complete, and I think they oftentimes get us bogged down in actually being able to change. So I was talking with one student, and we talked about how, well, of course it's hard to change. Our brains are wired to establish pattern to be able to function and operate effectively. So if I were to break a pattern, I'm fighting against my biology, my brain's ability to actually operate. So of course it would be hard. It's not a characterological fault. It's a natural process. It's very natural for us to struggle with that as human beings, knowing how to rewrite the script, right, to create new neural pathways, and to allow the water to flow more effectively. Sorry, I'm by a canal right here. Use a water metaphor there. So we need to be nicer to each other, kinder to each other, kinder to ourselves, because creating new neural pathways, new ways for our brain to operate and create new patterns is very, very challenging, as we all know, because we all try to do it and we all find ourselves slipping back into the old way, and then we find ourselves being self-critical, which becomes another pattern, right? That you can see the loop that would be occurring as we're forming a neural pathway that has to do with change leads to shame, which leads to stuckness, which leads to attempt to change, and now I have a very negative feedback loop that's been created versus being more self-compassionate. which I think is one of the most beautiful skills that we could practice in our lives, is self-compassion. And I'll share one more thought that is on my mind. It has to do with consequences. I've always had a bit of a strong, not always, but for many years now, had a strong feeling about the term consequences. And a lot of people will tell me that I split hairs too often, that that words don't matter as much, and for me, nuance is everything. And I've said that before, but it really is everything. And what I say is that if a word leads you to act in a certain way, then you might want to consider using a different word in order to help yourself act in a different way that's more effective. So the word consequence, I was talking recently with individuals, and they're talking about how the word consequence leads us to actually shut down our brain, because we think that the consequence itself is the end, it's the destination. So my child does something they shouldn't do, I give them a consequence, that consequence teaches them or motivates them, and I've done my, quote, job as a parent. When in my experience, nothing could be further than truth, that it's you have much more to do beyond that. And the consequence, if you do one, is just a step. It is a very small piece to the puzzle in order to help guide your child. Now, to be clear, this is assuming that your child has neurodevelopmental differences or is just a strong-willed individual. Some people call them oppositional, but opinionated, someone who maybe has a little higher level of emotionality, etc. So they are needing something beyond that. Some kids can operate with a lot of relationship and consequences. You just pump in the relationship, give consequences, they naturally mature and grow. In fact, you all may have children like that. I've got one child didn't need any consequences and just a lot of relationship and just seemed to self-regulate. It makes you look like you're an amazing parent even though you had nothing to do with it. Their success, right? And then you have another child that is not that way. So I think that in consequencing, the things we need to think about is that does it shut off our brain as a parent, and that's where I stop, or does it open me up to further conversation and dialogue? Have I really thought about the purpose of this consequence, or am I an automatic pilot, just assuming that I should give a consequence? Did I have a conversation first before I gave the consequence? Did we come to a consequence potentially together? Did we? Does my child respond well to consequences? Is it even working? If it isn't, then maybe I ought to think about something different. The level of anxiety my child struggles with, because consequences and anxiety can be very challenging. Is my kid a jump through the hoops kid? So I'm just teaching them to jump through the hoops more. They're not actually learning, even though it looks like they're learning because they're responding well to the consequences. So even a well-behaved, quote, child can have negative, there can be negative impact from doing consequences because they just learn how to jump through the hoops and they don't actually learn to think for themselves and process. Is it interfering with the relationship? Now, some people say, well, what do you do then? You do nothing? I said, no. You have a conversation, and you work through it, and you find potential consequences, right? You find potential ways of learning. Sometimes you don't do anything. You let them have the experience and learn from it. Now, to be clear, what I'm not talking about, and I've said this to you all before, but we're not talking about the past. Anytime I talk about something to think about or reflect on, it's not about the past typically, because when you're in a crisis state with your child, really nothing you do is going to benefit much. You survive it. And so, we're not looking back to think what I should have done in the past, because they didn't break it to begin with. We're just looking forward to the future, right? Continuing to learn and grow as parents and trying to incorporate different concepts and ideas and language that has a bigger bang for its buck than some of the things maybe we've tried in the past. and have learned, and patterns we've learned that we want to adjust and shift and try some new ideas and new language. Anyway, just a thought for this week. Hang in there, y'all, and appreciate you, trust, and I love working with your kids and love what we do. And we're grateful for y'all as parents and all that you've done for your kids and the beautiful foundation that you set throughout the years in teaching them and guiding them. So thank you. Have a great week, and we will talk to you all soon.